All right. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. I think I need to turn this on. 1 second, please. Is that better?
Yes.
Yes. Good morning. It is great to be here. We can get away from that microphone. It is great to be here in Martinsville, Virginia. A lovely fall morning, and just excited to hear. Thank you to Kate and Cheryl and the foundation for having me here today. Very excited to talk with community leaders and business leaders about the importance of childcare. What I've got for us this morning is information that will range from broad about the importance and why communities, education leaders, and business leaders should care about childcare and early childhood, down to the specific, including some more specific information about your community and what we know. I will say as a note, today is a very exciting day to be here, not only because of this event, but because in a few hours we are set to launch the results of our first year of VQB5, and I'll talk in a moment about this. But today really marks a watershed moment in early childhood for Virginia. The first thing I'd like to talk about is, and I like Kate's phrasing around the idea of a true north. And we at the Department of Education are laser focused on improving school readiness, making sure that all kids, when they have the opportunity to enter kindergarten, and parents can take a deep breath on some of the child care challenges, that they're fully ready to come into that kindergarten classroom. And you've often heard us talk about both readiness in terms of communities and schools for children, and making sure that kids are prepared to be successful. And in Virginia, we measure that in 4 ways. We look at literacy, math, social skills, and self-regulation. We do that for all 90,000 kindergartners that enter our public kindergarten programs every year. And what we know, thanks to some of the work of Elevate Early Education and the effort to grow out Virginia Kindergarten Readiness Program, or VKRP as it's called, is that too many of our children are coming in not ready in at least one of those areas. So you're only fully ready if you're ready in all those areas, and about 60% of our kids come in ready in all of those areas. But 40% are coming in not ready. And if you talk to a kindergarten teacher, they will tell you that they can point out, often within the first few weeks, which are the children that have had the ability to go to an early childhood program, and which of the children are coming in sort of fully behind. And they often have to spend the greater part of the year trying to catch those children up. And what they say to us, kind of anecdotally, is the literacy and math sometimes we can catch up more quickly than the social emotional, making sure that kids can manage those big emotions, making sure that kids can persist at a task, that they can demonstrate curiosity. That often takes longer than even some of the literacy and the math. We also know that this varies. So I always sort of show the school readiness overall, and then folks sort of similar to Garrison, Keeler, Lake Wobegon, but I'm sure in my community, all the children come in, right, kindergarten ready. They're all above average. But what this data shows us is that what we see is kind of a range across the state. So this is the state organized into the regions. The blue circles indicate the percent of all children within an area, within a region that meet the benchmark. So that ranges from 63% down to about 58%, 56%. And then the yellow circle is the percent of the children in low-income households who meet the benchmark. Because what we do know is that children who are in low-income households are less likely to come in school ready. And what you see is a range. And we look at both sort of how many kids overall have that opportunity, but also how big is the gap between our children kind of coming in, generally speaking, and our children coming in from low-income households. So although for West, Reading Region West, in which Henry County and Martinsville are located in, you see that it's a slightly lower amount of children, 59% of kids overall are coming in. You actually see a closer gap. So you will do a better job of kind of making sure that your low-income children have that opportunity to come to kindergarten ready. You still see, however, there's a gap between what we want to see is 80, 90%, 100% of children coming in ready. And why does it matter? There's a couple of reasons that school readiness matters, and some of you may even be more expert in this than me, but We now know, due to the brain science that we have today, how important those early years are. We thought the babies weren't talking. We thought the babies were just playing. We was like, it's fine. School only starts when they step in the doors of kindergarten. And that's simply not true. As we look at MRIs, as we measure and do research and science with infants and toddlers and preschoolers, it turns out that this is actually the most rapid period of brain development. Makes sense when you look at the size of the baby's head versus a 5-year-old's head, but it's even more important than just sheer mass. It's the connections. It's the connections between neurons that basically create the foundation for all future academic and social emotional learning, right? So it's not just about, all right, how much are we supporting babies through talking and oral language acquisition? It's equally as much about how we're supporting them to manage those feelings, because if you don't have that foundation by the time you enter kindergarten, it's much harder to kind of catch up and to build those skills. Another way to think about this, some folks you might heard 90% of brain development happens before age 5. The other one is 1 million neural connections are formed every second. So every moment with an infant, toddler, or preschooler is an opportunity for learning. And we can quantify this in a whole lot of ways. Again, as I said before, we didn't realize how much oral languization was happening and how early it was. So we start to see different abilities in cognition as early as 3 months in terms of how babies are responding to words. Vocabulary gaps pop up as early as 18 months in terms of what babies knew. I'll give you an example. During the pandemic, children waved later. So when you look at all the science that came in, and when children go in for well-child appointments, the parents take them in. 1-year-olds don't go in by themselves. They often would do the little survey on how, when did your child wave? Because of the lack of exposure to other human beings, while most kids wave between 10 and 12 months, during the period of the pandemic, children were waving like 12 to 14 to 16 to 18 months, right? So these things that we don't think are we're not kind of necessarily paying attention to, are occurring every single day. By the time kids are 3 and 4, you can basically look at their underlying vocabulary. That is the number of words. They're not reading or writing yet, right? But the number of words they know. And then if you then measure those kids 5 or 6 years later, it will match up with their 3rd and 4th grade reading comprehension. And then you've heard this story before, but you can basically track 3rd grade reading to everything from high school graduation rates to even criminal justice involvement. So it's really predictive. It makes sense, right? You think about it, I now have elementary school age children, and they talk about it as a pivotal moment from learning to read to reading to learn. And if you don't know how to read by the 3rd grade, if you don't have those kind of basic math skills, the rest of school is really hard for you. And what do you do when school is hard for you? You act out, right? And then it just becomes a cascading of challenges in order, to be successful. If you don't believe the national research, let me explain this chart to you. This is a very powerful chart about actual Virginia data. So what this took, because we have years and years and years of the PALS, or the literacy screener in Virginia. What this took is like a bunch of kindergartners over a couple of years and said, how do you do at the beginning of kindergarten, right? So this is in the first 60 days of kindergarten, and it's just a set of basic literacy indicators. But we took those kindergartners and then you sort of broke them into 5 groups. The group in the gray are those who did the very best. The group in the yellow, who and the orange, are scored below the kind of the benchmark. We then looked at those kids in 3rd grade. And what this bar graph says is that you came into kindergarten very, very prepared, no matter where you went, to kindergarten, 1st, 2nd, or 3rd grade in the Commonwealth. 92% of you were reading on level by the time you took your SOLs. Right? 92%. It's like an almost guarantee. You could have had a terrible 2nd grade teacher, you could have an amazing 2nd grade teacher, but 92% of those children were reading by 3rd grade. In sharp contrast, if you came in very far behind, it was a coin toss, right? Again, across the state, fewer than half of the kids who came in at the very far behind were reading by 3rd grade. Some of them were fortunate and had extraordinary K-3 experiences that got them up to level, but again, it was functionally equivalent to a coin toss. About 50% of those kids, we were able to catch up, 50% or 55% we were not. And you see, for each of the groups in between. So if we can get more kids to look like this, coming into school ready, across our big system, right, that serves 100,000 kids a year across many, many different and highly variable kindergarten, first and second grade and third grade classroom experiences, we can almost guarantee, right, that they'll be reading on level by third grade. So I don't know if there's anything more powerful than that in terms of why we need to focus on birth to 5. Unless, of course, you're like, well, I get it. I care about kids, but I also care about the economy. So I'm going to flip hats for a moment here and talk about why, for the business leaders in the room, you should care about this. In addition to understanding more about the brain science than we've ever did before, we have a major demographic shift occurring in our state and in our country. So yes, there are fewer kids born in the Commonwealth than there were a few years ago. But the number of kids who are in our early childhood care and education system is higher because more of their parents are working. So this just gives you back about a decade, but what you see if you go even back further to the 80s and the 90s is you've got this constant upward trend of the number of children under the age of 6 in the Commonwealth who have all available parents in the workforce. So if you're in a solo parent household, your one parent or guardian is the workforce, and if you're in a dual parent household, both are in the workforce. This number keeps ticking up and up and up, and what we know is that 2/3 of kids under the age of 6 have all available parents in the workforce. So those parents are putting those kids somewhere, and Kate described kind of the different types of experiences. And the real question is, as leaders and as business leaders, where are they putting their kids, and how do we make sure that it's in experiences that are putting kids on track for success? You also will start to hear more and more from employees, working moms, working dads, who are going to say, this is important, and I'm not just interested in babysitting, right? Like, I didn't pay more for my mortgage for my 3 children to go to childcare so they would just not get hurt, right? That whole premise of like, all I need to do is have custodial care is really, when you think about that brain science and that image I showed, is really not true anymore, right? Folks want to make sure that their infants, their toddlers, and their preschoolers are learning. This also shows, we looked at, because we've had a pretty significant growth in participation in our child care subsidy program. We think a lot of that has to do with how many available parents in the workforce. But we also looked at, and this is correlational, but basically what this says is that there is a correlation, so we can't say it causes it, but in communities that have more childcare options, you see more workforce participation. And your unemployment rate goes down. So there's a kind of the dotted line represents kind of a statistical significance of correlation. But basically what we see is when you invest and you make sure that there are options, early childhood options, not just for those parents who can afford it, but for all families who need to work, you see that you have lower unemployment in the communities that have more early childhood options. And this is data from the Commonwealth of Virginia that goes back to the pandemic and really tracks. Virginia was one of the worst states initially in terms of moms opting out of the workforce, and then it made significant investments in childcare and early childhood, and really was able to reverse that trend. This also shows that this is going to be mapped in a different way to the same piece around if you can ensure that there is access across the economic spectrum, so not only kind of high-end childcare, but that there's publicly funded childcare, Head Start, Virginia Preschool Initiative, childcare subsidy, mixed delivery, that you can, it correlates with higher rates of employment. Of course, I've talked to business leaders in Southwest Virginia and South Side and West, and there's always that chicken and the egg problem, right? Of like, I want to hire more people, but they need to find childcare, right? And so that continues to be one of the biggest issues facing exurban and rural Virginia. But we do know that once you get a certain level of enrollment, that it does help and provides a sort of a virtuous cycle of supporting greater employment. So we should care about childcare and early childhood because it matters for kids and it matters for our K-12 system. We should care about early childhood and childcare because it matters for our economy, and we think that part of the reason that we have historic unemployment, in Virginia is that we have also made these really significant investments in childcare and early childhood. So what are we doing about it? One of the things that we do at the Department of Education to support communities like this one is to say that our true north is school readiness. And we recognize that parents want to be able to choose across a variety of settings, and that we need to support all of the different settings where kids and parents might want to go. So that includes family childcare, faith-based options, early Head Start, school-based programs like Virginia Preschool Initiative of early childhood special education, right? It doesn't matter the name on the outside of the building or the funding source. What matters more is what's happening inside those settings and how they're preparing kids for success. We also know that not all of those programs started in the same place, and I'll talk about a little bit why today is such an important announcement for early childhood, but we've got to figure out how we elevate all of those programs. For parents of infants and toddlers, they're not going to drop off that baby at the elementary school, right? They're going to want a different setting, often a family childcare setting or a childcare center or faith-based option. For rural areas of the state, sometimes family childcare is the only one that makes economic sense, right? You're just not going to have enough kids in a certain geographic catchment area to justify building a huge center. You're going to need to think about family childcare, right, where there's 4 or 8 or 12 children. And we need to figure out the options that are not just about the academic year and the academic day, right? If you're working shift work from 6 to 3, that's when you need childcare, right? And we have to make sure that we are adapting the system to meet that. So we support at the Department of Ed kind of a portfolio of programs, and we really care and want to understand the experiences that are happening in family childcare, licensed childcare, public schools, faith-based programs, and our Head Start grantees across the state. So let's talk a little bit about what we're doing to increase access and sort of start to think about what would make sense for your area of the state. So the challenge, and Kate didn't mention this, but is that it's not only are you trying to find a good option, but you're also having to afford that good option. And what we know right now is that if you have 2 kids under the age of 5, you could be spending upwards of 40% of your income on childcare, right? Right off the bat, right? Not to mention housing and utilities and transportation and all the things. Tuition rates for an infant are just over $16,000, for preschool are $13,700. The conundrum, and what's so darn frustrating about all of this, is that even though you pay so much, the child care teacher doesn't get paid anything, right? They are still at sort of a minimum wage or just above. And the challenge is, and we all learn this, anybody who was the parent of a small child during the pandemic, you just can't outsource this. You cannot give it to a device, you cannot put it in front of a TV. When you talk about babies and toddlers in preschool, it is just very labor intensive. Young human beings learn in the context of relationships, right? And there's no technology or science or AI, at least as we figured out now, that can replace that. And so this is a very labor-intensive industry that requires those high costs, right? When you think about what it can take, the infant, an infant ratio. And again, imagine this as a scenario. Close your eyes. I'm going to bring 4 babies to you. Okay, I'm going to bring 4 babies. I'm going to ask you to keep those babies for 8 to 10 hours. Okay, and you got to change them, and you got to feed them, and you got to, kind of talk with them and do that. Like, that's a lot, right? And that is our ratio right now, and that is why it's so expensive, right? To kind of cover all of that care. Now, for 3 and 4-year-olds, you go up to 1 to 10. As it gets, you get to elementary school, it's 1 to 20. But now you understand why it's so expensive. I show this graph to kind of put it in context. So everybody talks about how expensive college is. We've got 2 bars up here. One of the bars is the cost of a birth to 5 early childhood care and education experience in these regions of the state. The other one is 4-year college tuition, okay? Similar time frames, right? Both are opportunities you want to provide to your children. With everywhere except for one of the state, the blue bar, which is not college, I'm going to give you that hint. The blue bar, which is the early childhood experience, is more expensive than 4 years of in-state tuition, right? So you might be out here thinking, like, you know what, I'm excited, I'm a hokey, I want my kid to go to tech, I'm going to start saving right before they are born, right? And you can save for 18 years and you might have some money, but you forgot about the fact that those first 4.5 years, you're actually going to be spending more than tech, right, to have them go to childcare. And so this is just a reminder, right, for all you, and there's not FAFSA, and there's not a lot of scholarships. There's no, baby athletic scholarships. You can be like, oh, my baby can play football, right? No. And so this is just a kind of a reminder of, like, we've got this situation where parents are making less than they would make in their college. There's not this opportunity to have 18 years of savings. There's not a lot of federal support, in terms of, like, individual loans and grants. And you still face, in almost every area of the state, a steeper cost for early childhood than you do for in-state tuition. So we hear this from families, right? It's more than my mortgage, it's really expensive, I'd like to have more babies, but I can't figure out how to make it work, and that the only way that this is made affordable is by that public financing of the system. And we've got a couple of different programs. We have our state pre-K, which is called Virginia Preschool Initiative. We've got the Childcare Subsidy, which is a voucher program that kids, families can take to family childcare or childcare. We've got mixed delivery, which is in childcare settings. We've got Head Start and Early Head Start. And what we have seen in recent years, and again, think about going from a place where we had more moms opting out of the workforce than our other states to a historic moment of unemployment. What we have seen is a dramatic increase in enrollment of the publicly funded kids. So these are kind of moderate and low-income families who are depending on public dollars to be able to afford early childhood care and education. We had a dip right in the pandemic. We were about just under 53,000 kids across all these programs before. We saw, like everybody saw, a dip in enrollment during the kind of the height of the pandemic. But then, unlike our K-12 system, we have come roaring back. And 2/3 of those families now are actually choosing private settings because they need to work, go to school, or participate in job training, and so they need that full day, full year. But we were at 53,000 kids pre-pandemic across the system, and now we're at just over 81,000 kids, which is a huge workforce enabler, and hopefully we'll start to see the positive impact of that on our school readiness. That was made possible this year for the first time ever by a historic state investment in early childhood. So you might have heard we were talking about a fiscal cliff a year ago. More and more families needed vouchers, needed to participate in the system, and there was no more federal relief dollars. Our governor and General Assembly came together in a bipartisan way and made a historic state investment. Not 10 million, not 20 million, over $366 million this year and $461 million next year. Taken together with all of our federal funding, that represents a $1.1 billion investment in this space. And yet, if you talk to providers right now, we have wait lists. We have wait lists of just over 9,000 kids right now statewide, of which 4,000 are infants and toddlers. And what we think this is about is just, even though we're funding more kids than ever before and we're making a significant state investment, there's just something shifting. Parents want to be able to put their kids in childcare earlier, right? And parents need to participate in the workforce. And you've probably heard this, when you've talked out in the community, right? It's just, you just cannot make it anymore on a one salary, right? Like, both parents need to be involved. Or what we also hear happening is a mom might want to opt out for some period of time right after she has the baby, but not 3 or 4 years, right? Because it's impossible to kind of get back into the workforce. So we are seeing this historic investment, and we are both very, very excited about the growth of this program, but also dealing with wait lists for Virginia Preschool Initiative, for mixed delivery, and then just really significant wait lists for the child care vouchers. So that's where we are today in terms of access. Historic growth, more families than ever before participating in our publicly funded programs, more investment than ever before. And what's so exciting about this investment as community leaders is, for the first time ever, we have more state dollars than federal dollars going towards childcare. And when you have dollars going for something, that means two things. One, it means that your legislators trust you, right? Because there's no greater act of faith than a legislator than making a budgetary investment. And two, that legislators are now paying more attention to child care than they ever have before. And we know that we still are facing pretty significant wait lists. So there's just greater and greater demand, particularly from the parents of infants and toddlers that can't be served by BPI. Really, the main program for them are these child care vouchers. But what about the quality, right? You heard me talk a little bit. It's not just about making sure we have places to go. You can pay pennies on the dollar, and maybe your child won't get hurt, right? But will we really support our children to learn? And we think part of the reason that our legislators are willing to make this big investment in early childhood in Virginia is because we've built out a nation-leading quality measurement and improvement system. So in 2020, we passed a law saying any site that takes public dollars, whether it's a child care voucher, Head Start, or Virginia Preschool Initiative, needs to participate in a statewide measurement and improvement system. And over the last 4.5 years, in partnership with communities like Martinsville and Henry County, we have built out this system. We will announce today we're rolling out 3,121 quality profiles for early childhood sites. family day homes, public schools, child care centers, faith-based programs across the Commonwealth. There are 3,121 sites. There's sites located in every city and county in Virginia. Across these sites, there's over 138,000 children served in those sites, right? So there's about a quarter of kids under the age of 6 in the Commonwealth served in these sites. This system of measurement looks at two important indicators: the interactions that are happening between teachers and children, we call them educators, whether it's family childcare, or schools, and whether or not they're using quality curriculum. So a very kind of simple but powerful system, because we're actually getting into every single one of these classrooms and measuring in a way that makes sense for infants and toddlers and preschoolers. This is not a walkthrough where you expect to see children at desks, right? We're talking about babies on the floor crawling. We're talking about kids in centers, right? Pretending to cook in a kitchen or to build with blocks. And we've done this in part with our Ready regions. So we've set up nine competitive entities across the state, including our Ready Region West, that are helping us measure every classroom, bringing providers together from public-private partnerships, engaging families, and helping us to coordinate enrollment. And here's what we know about your region of the state. So again, statewide, we have 10,678 classrooms. You'll see about 56% of them are pre-K, 30% of them are toddler, and 14% are infant. And then you'll see in Ready Region West, we have about 500 classrooms, a similar breakdown in terms of pre-K, infant, and toddler. So again, this is not just about preschool, right? There's a significant number of infant and toddler. We know that for the 3,121 sites, that 98% of them meet or exceed expectations. Our statewide average in terms of our points is 588. Ready Region West, of which Martinsville and Henry County are part of, scored slightly above that. 95% of your sites are using an approved curriculum. So curriculum is a choice, but that's a huge, really exciting accomplishment for this area, because that means so much of your childcare and family childcare is actually using curriculum. When we started this, fewer than half of family childcare and childcare statewide were using curriculum. You'll see we have 79 sites across the state that exceeds expectations, including in this area of the state. This is just amazing. These are sites that, because we use a national tool, a rigorous tool that's an hour to an hour and a half of observation in these classrooms, and these are classrooms that have been visited multiple times. These folks could be considered nation leading, not only within Ready Region West or within Virginia, but across the country. Of those 79 sites, we've got childcare, we've got family childcare, we've got Head Start, and we've got public schools. So this is the first time in the Commonwealth we're actually elevating childcare and family childcare just as high quality as schools and Head Start. So that's a really important moment. 60% of those 79 sites are in private settings that offer that full day, full year. So it truly is a leveling of the playing field and recognizing that every part of this sector, not only BPI, not only Head Start, but family childcare and childcare matter. And we know that we've got 51 sites across the state that scored very low in terms of these interactions. Most are not using curriculum. And we are now able, we didn't know what we didn't know before, but we're now able to go in there and support those sites. We have consultants going out, experts who are creating plans with them and lifting the bar, right, helping them get better. Our goal is in a few years in Virginia that average score is higher, that there are no sites that don't, that all of our sites meet expectation. And what that means, whether you're in this area of the state or any other area, no matter where you go, if you have to rely on a public dollar, you know you can expect a certain level of quality. And this wasn't possible before under our prior system, because even though we had some real bright spots, 5 out of the 6 programs that took child care subsidy weren't even part of the measurement system. So you just didn't know what you didn't know. Now, as of today, at about noon, you will be able to go online and you'll be able to look at all of the profiles for all of the programs and sites in your community that take public dollars. And that is the VDOE's quality profile, which will go live. It has a map. You'll be able to click on your area, put in your zip code. It's got geolocation. As long as you're not on a state computer, you can use that. It's mobile friendly. It has hours. It has their scores. It has what kind of ages they've served. And so you can actually look and find out about your community, whether you're a parent looking for options or whether you are a community leader or a business leader who's saying, I want to hire some new employees, or I want to build a new plant and want to know kind of what resources are available in my community. It is similar to the school quality profiles, but different. And again, 3,121 profiles are going to go live at noon today with this brand new resource for families. We also hope that this will elevate the importance of early childhood, and just when you look and you see and you realize how great that child care program is. Sometimes because of the lack of resources, the outside of a child care center might not be the best looking thing, but then you're going to open this up and see that they're actually providing high quality adult-child interactions every day, and that matters way more than anything else. This is often a debate I had with my husband when we were putting our kids in child care. He's like, oh, look at that, look how nice that building is, that playground. I was like, that might be nice, but let me walk into that room and see how those educators are interacting with those kids. That's what matters more than the books on the shelf, or what kind of cool colors on the playground. And for those of you who have kids, you also know that the kids very rarely play on the actual playground. Yeah. They're in the dirt, they're in the sticks, right? They want anything but the fancy playground to play in. So we also will encourage, and hopefully you'll start to see these out. These will be available today for all of our program certificates. So again, being able to put up not just your licensing certificate about your health and safety, but to put up your BQB5 certificate in all of our programs. So it's an exciting moment. And what we hope to see is an opportunity to not only recognize sites that are exemplars, but also to really support improvement. As we said before, childcare was so affected by the pandemic. It is so hard to run private childcare in this state and in this country right now. And so we also want to recognize that everybody can be a little bit better tomorrow than they are today. We need every single provider. Folks said when this law was passed, well, you're going to lose all the private businesses. They're all going to opt out. As of last month, we had 3,000 private businesses and entities willing to take child care subsidy, which is also a historic high. So yes, the stakes are higher, but we also have better rates, and we're finally recognizing child care and family child care as just as high quality as some of our other options. So with that, that is just kind of an overview of where we are in Virginia. We're trying to make sure that every kid has the opportunity to come to school ready. We know that our kids in underprivileged backgrounds, we know that our kids that are dual language learners or children with special needs, we know that our Black and Latino children and our children in low-income households are less likely to come in ready. We got to make sure that we're providing resources to our working families, particularly from those less advantaged backgrounds, so that they can pick an option that makes sense. We need to recognize that family childcare, Head Start, faith-based preschool, and school-based preschool can all be high quality, right? And not just kind of say, well, it's got to be one setting or the other. Make sure that more families have access and choice, and then ultimately also elevating by supporting the measurement. We did 28,000 classroom observations last year, and putting that information at parents and community leaders' fingertips so that we can improve the system, show how great it is, and ultimately start to see that kids coming in, the 90,000 kids that come each year into our kindergarten classrooms, are more ready than ever before, which hopefully will translate into better third grade reading and math results, higher graduation, and ultimately the early childhood kids of today are your workforce of tomorrow, and more prepared kids for the workforce. With that, I'll pause there and see if there's any questions that folks have.
I just have a question about some of our Ready Region West and our early childhood centers who are private, who've already done the stages testing for 1 to 4. Will they have to retest to get the new certificates that are being sent out, or will those who have gone through all the training and got to level 4 child care centers, will they be automatically given certificates?
So it's been a multi-year effort. So everybody who takes public dollars has been required to participate. It's a little bit different from prior years. It's based on observations. And so last year, 100% of programs that took public dollars participated. So they were brought into the system, their classrooms were observed. The big shift is that now every set of educators in the classrooms receive feedback. So they were brought into the system, and everybody has shifted over now to BQB5.
Thank you.
You mentioned the amount of money that the state is actually given, and there's a wait list for a lot of this money.
So, do we know how long it's going to take to actually dwindle down and get this wait list taken care of?
That is a great question. So, what we were able to do for the two years up until this July 1st was to take all of the relief dollars and say to the field, whether you were a school division with BPI or you were private childcare, as many families come up and as are eligible, you can serve them. We will kind of add and add and add. And what we saw is that there was much greater demand for private child care. There was demand for kind of everything, but the greatest demand was for private child care. 2/3 of families are now seeking that. And so we grew and grew and grew from about 20,000 to about 43,000 child care vouchers. In part because of the large price tag that it would take to sustain this, what the state decided, the governor and the General Assembly decided was, all right, we've grown a lot, now we need to sort of sustain that, right? And we'll sustain that with a really significant state investment, but once we do that, we're gonna create these wait lists. And so that happened. We basically said any family that was being served or came in before June 30th would be served. And they said, and then we'll establish those wait lists. From July 1st to kind of October 1st, we've had this growth from no wait list to 9,600 plus kids, right? So we don't know exactly how long it will take to resolve. We're measuring attrition, but what we're finding is whether it's employers or elected officials or others are saying, well, this is not tolerable, right? Like, this is a real problem. I can't work if I have, I'm on a wait list spot, right? And from a child care provider perspective, I can't make payroll with like a wait list spot, right? Like I need, to actually have the voucher and, again, to receive the voucher. So we don't know now how long it will take to kind of serve all those families. What we do know now is that this is more growth and more demand than was expected, and certainly more growth and more demand than what we saw pre-pandemic. So something has shifted in the Commonwealth, whether it's the quality of these programs, whether it's the information available, whether it's the more working families. I think there's a lot of hypotheses, but we are hearing from a lot of elected officials who are saying this is a really big problem. Like, we need to be able to solve for this wait list. And right now we have a new commission on early childhood, which has legislators, business leaders, community leaders, and others that's grappling with this and is charged with making these recommendations. And they're sort of asking these very questions, like how big is this wait list going to be, and how long are we going to have to wait? Because it's not, it's not tenable, right, to sort of wait and wait and wait. And the question will be kind of, for our governor and General Assembly this year about how much they want to work to do this, because we thought there would be more attrition on this program, and there's not. And just more and more families are showing up every day who want to work, go to school, or participate in job training and upskill, and just really need childcare. And as I said before, I think the biggest shocker in this data is the number of parents of infants and toddlers who are saying, I want this voucher to be able to kind of pursue greater self-sufficiency, and we simply don't have enough vouchers to go around.
Hey, thanks. Are there any conversations at the state level on universal preschool?
So, yes and no. I think one of the important pieces is that for Virginia's purposes, there's been more of a desire to think about this as a birth to 5 system and to recognize all of the different providers that are in the mix. And so some of the examples, and there's not one way to do universal preschool, but some of the examples of universal preschool, while they've helped address serving the 4-year-olds, that they've actually made it worse inadvertently for infants and toddlers. And the reason is that 4-year-olds, it's hard to imagine this, but 4-year-olds are actually the most lucrative element of the early childhood system, right? Simply because you can have the most kids in the classroom, right? So you get to bring in, think of them not, for all the MBAs in the room, like these are children, but like every child is a revenue, right, in private child care. And if you've got a classroom of 20, right, with 2 teachers, as much, brings in much more revenue than a classroom of 6 infants and 2 educators, right? And And so what has happened in places like the District of Columbia and DC, when they moved to universal pre-K for 4s and then 3-year-olds, infant care is now like $30,000 to $40,000 a year, because they pulled 95% of those kids are in schools, whether that's a traditional public or a charter, and so all of a sudden you've got to make the economics of a center work just on infants and toddlers, right? Which you just have to pass on all the pure thing. If you think about it, you look at how much you pay, and sometimes you'll be like, oh, it's $250 a week for preschool and $300 for an infant, but that's really not like that's not. If you think about the difference between a ratio of 1 to 4 and and 1 to 10, like really infant is twice, if not 2.5 times more expensive. But because of the way that parents can afford, centers kind of make that adjustment, so they kind of overcharge you for a 4-year-old and undercharge you for infant. So when you pull all those kids out of the system, it ends up with really high infant and toddler costs. So that's, I think, a caution number one. I think a caution number two is, as I said before, the fact that we just have so much demand from infants and toddlers, and I think realistically, and I know I saw Sandy earlier, our superintendents might love babies, there's just not a real desire. I've yet to find a superintendent like, bring me some babies to this elementary school, right? Like they'll say, I'll do 3s, we have more, BPI's 3s and served ever before. So I think realistically, we have to recognize the role of family childcare, of faith-based programs that have done this historically, of early Head Start and Head Start, which has been really important for 60 plus years in this country, and say across those programs, how do we match the services to meet the parents' need with the scarce resources focusing first on families in the greatest need, and then sort of talking about, again, depending on how you might want to approach it, how you could then grow from there. But the practical reality is that you have this kind of slice, right, of parents where, and if you talk, I'm sure those of you who are employers, if my child care bill is at, or above my take-home pay, it simply doesn't make sense, right? It just doesn't make sense. And so that's like a really important part of the economy that if we don't solve for with some kind of sliding scale system that needs to include all of the array of programs, it's just going to be really, really tough. And I think there's like more and more awareness that we need these moms. It should never be required, right? There are parents who are going to say, for my child's benefit and for my family and my beliefs that I want to be home for multiple years. But what we're just seeing is more and more families that's not maybe their preference, and thinking about how do we sort of develop the supply to meet that, and then how do you make it affordable for those families who want to do that, while also making sure there's measurement so that I can turn around to our elected officials and say, I can tell you where every public dollar went and what you're getting for it in terms of these 28,000 observations represent 2.1 million minutes of insight into what our kids are experiencing. 2.1 million minutes, right, of data about what our kids are experiencing, and we'll be able year over year to talk about that, improve that, and then connect that to, if you think about how much we invest per kid in K-12, right, connect that to better outcomes is a big part of the puzzle.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Tammy Pearson. I'm with the Martinsville City Council. I think in doing some of the research, I read last year where I think it was Botetourt County had partnered with a technology company, and they were doing something called Wonder School. So I'm wondering about the outcome of that, and if there are any additional partnership opportunities with companies that we can bring to the more rural areas.
Absolutely, it's a great question. So this is a hope, and the commission has been raising this. We would love to see more employer participation in this work. Right now you have bright spots you might have heard about, from Patagonia to some of our health and hospital systems, when businesses and employers directly provide childcare. Now, whether that's part of that their actual business, or whether they contract with a Wonder School or Bright Horizons to do that, and that is growing. And we are encouraging that. There are some federal tax deductions. What we have learned is that oftentimes businesses do a very good job of reducing their federal tax liability, and so sometimes those deductions don't, or those kind of, deductions don't go as far as you might think in terms of inspiring childcare and employers to get into the business of childcare. We know we've got folks in Ballot Health who are doing a lot of work in the childcare space and kind of public-private partnerships happening out in Southwest Virginia. We've got a tri-share that we're piloting right now. We took some of our mixed delivery dollars, so that's when we kind of fund sort of groups of slots, like a classroom of slots, and we're making them go further by having the parent contribute a part, the state contribute a part, and then the employer, Ballot Health, will contribute a part. And so kind of a tri-share model, which we've just kicked off this year, in this hopes of sort of figuring out how can we create more incentives for business to play a role. I don't know if you saw, the Federal Reserve put out last month was, whatever the last month they measured, maybe this was August, was one of the highest recorded childcare disruptions. So just sort of productivity disruptions due to childcare instability. And this is really a challenge, and it's particularly a challenge if folks are scrambling for spots, right? And there's just not enough supply, and they're sort of relying on kind of ad hoc things. And so the extent to which having, whether it's your employers providing it directly, some places employers are doing kind of emergency childcare also as an alternative, right? We're not gonna do it full time, but if you have, a sick kid or sort of sick parent or some kind of emergency situation, we can help, sick nanny, we can help with that. But we are hoping to see more of that. I think the other thing that we see a little bit here and there is also localities that might want to contribute. So we have a handful of localities that either use relief dollars to actually pay for childcare within their communities, or we have in Northern Virginia, we have communities that have actually paid directly for childcare vouchers, and they just make their childcare vouchers look like the state childcare vouchers. So trying to explore where possible, how we can bring more investment. I will be talking this week to the Chamber of Commerce, actually on Thursday, about the importance of this, but it's tough, right? I think ultimately, there's a desire to be a part of the solution, but then you're like, but we also need, it has a real cost, right? And so trying to figure out how can we build partnerships, public-private partnerships, to encourage employers to contribute a little bit towards ultimately making sure that they have a more stable workforce, which hopefully would end up with a positive return on investment.
Thank you. Sorry, thank you, Jenna. Thank you, Jenna, for being with us.
Of course, thank you.